The gymnasium at Ridgemont Elementary looked like something out of a catalog that evening, the kind of catalog nobody actually orders from but everybody pretends to admire. Fairy lights wrapped around every pillar, round tables covered in white linen, a professional DJ booth set up in the corner with colored spotlights that swept slowly across the floor. Parents milled around with glasses of sparkling water, talking about property values and school board decisions, and somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the noise and the light and the carefully arranged centerpieces, a 10-year-old girl named Lily sat very still at the edge of the room, watching other children dance, and trying not to let anyone see that she was crying. Her name was Lily Fontaine. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, and she had learned over the past 2 years how to make herself very small in a room full of people. Not invisible, she never quite managed invisible, but small enough that people's eyes passed over her the way they pass over fire exits, noticed only when necessary. The evening was supposed to be a celebration, Ridgemont's annual spring gala. A fundraiser that the parent council took extremely seriously and that the children tolerated because there was usually good food. Lily's table had a balloon bouquet tied to the back of her chair, yellow and white, because those were her favorite colors. Someone had remembered that. It was such a small thing, and yet sitting there alone while the balloons twisted slowly in the air-conditioned air, it felt less like a kindness and more like evidence. Here is the girl who is here. Here is the girl nobody is standing beside. Across the room her father was shaking hands. Owen Fontaine was 41 years old and he had the particular posture of a man who has learned to hold himself together through sheer stubbornness. He was tall with the kind of tired around his eyes that doesn't come from one bad night but from many accumulated slowly over months and years until it becomes just part of a face. He had been Ridgemont Elementary's new principal for 7 months. Before that he had been an assistant principal in Kelowna. Before that he had been a husband. Ellen had died 26 months ago, pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the kind that doesn't give you time to argue with it. She was diagnosed in October and gone by the following March, and in between those 2 dates Owen had learned what it means to watch someone you love become a stranger to their own body while still being entirely, heartbreakingly themselves. Lily had been 8 years old. She had understood more than Owen wanted her to, and less than she thought she did, which is the particular tragedy of being 8. He had taken the Ridgemont position because a new city felt necessary. Not running, he was careful to tell himself it wasn't running, but recalibrating. A fresh school, a fresh start, a chance for Lily to make friends without the weight of everyone already knowing what had happened to her family. It had not gone exactly as planned. Lily had a condition called selective mutism, which had worsened significantly after Ellen died. In comfortable settings, at home, with Owen, with her grandmother on the phone, she talked freely, laughed easily, had opinions about everything from documentaries to the proper way to load a dishwasher. But in school, in crowds, in any environment where the anxiety reached a certain pitch, the words simply stopped coming. Not because she didn't have them. Because her throat closed around them like a fist. Other children didn't know what to make of her. They weren't cruel. Exactly. Ridgemont was a decent school, and Owen had made that his first priority as principal. But children are practical creatures, and a girl who doesn't talk back is a girl who is difficult to play with. So they drifted. Not away from her exactly, just toward the things that were easier. Owen knew all of this. He understood it the way a person understands weather, thoroughly, intellectually, while still being completely unable to stop getting wet. He did not fully understand, standing across that gymnasium shaking the hand of a school board trustee named Gerald, was that his daughter had been sitting alone at that table for 40 minutes, that the balloon strings had stopped twisting because the air conditioning had cycled off. That Lily had eaten exactly 4 crackers from the appetizer plate, and was now simply staring at the dance floor with the expression of someone watching a film in a language they don't speak. Gerald was talking about enrollment projections. Owen nodded. Gerald's wife asked about the new literacy program. Owen answered. A teacher he respected touched his elbow and asked a question about the field trip waiver process, and Owen answered that too, because he was the principal, and there were always questions, and the questions never paused to check whether he had a daughter sitting alone 20 meters away, who needed him more than Gerald needed to discuss enrollment projections. That was when Thomas Rao walked in. Thomas was 38 years old and had the slightly harried energy of a man who is perpetually 5 minutes late to everything and has made a kind of peace with it. He was a physiotherapist at the Ridgemont Sports Medicine Clinic. Not a parent who moved in Owen's professional circles. Not someone who had opinions about enrollment projections. He was there because his 8-year-old son, Kieran, was in Lily's class, and Kieran had begged to go to the gala because there was reportedly going to be a photo booth, and Kieran took the concept of photo booths very seriously. Thomas had moved to Ridgemont 3 years ago from Toronto. He and Kieran were a two-person operation. Thomas's marriage had ended when Kieran was 2, not through tragedy but through the slow, painful realization that he and his ex-wife had become people who made each other worse. They shared custody generously, without bitterness, which was something Thomas was quietly proud of. But on weeks like this one, when Kieran was with him, Thomas moved through the world with the particular attentiveness of a single parent, always scanning, always accounting, always one part of his mind running a background check on where his kid was and whether he was okay. Kieran had already spotted classmates near the photo booth and launched himself in that direction with the focused velocity of a golden retriever who has just seen a tennis ball. Thomas watched him go, smiled, and then let his eyes move around the room the way they always did. Occupational habit, maybe, from years of reading posture and body language in a clinical setting. Who was holding tension in their shoulders? Who was compensating? Who was protecting something? His eyes found Lily. She was sitting very straight, the way children sit when they are trying to look like they meant to be where they are. Her hands were folded in her lap. A balloon bouquet above her chair had started to list slightly to one side. She was watching the other children dance with an expression that Thomas recognized immediately, because he had worn it himself at certain work events in the first year after the divorce. The expression of someone who has decided that watching from the outside is fine, actually, is preferable, is a choice they are making, and who almost believes it. He stood there for a moment. There was a part of him, the part that was tired, that had worked a full day and then helped Kieran with a science project and hadn't eaten since noon, that said this was not his responsibility. The girl's parents were somewhere in this room. There were teachers, there were parent volunteers with lanyards. It was a school event at a school, which was, by definition, full of adults whose job was to notice things like this. Thomas had spent 12 years helping people learn to trust their bodies again after injury. He knew something about what it looked like when a person had stopped trusting that the world would make room for them, and he knew, with a certainty that bypassed all the tired and hungry parts of his brain, and went straight to somewhere quieter, that if he walked away right now, he would think about this child for the rest of the evening. So he didn't walk away. He crossed the gymnasium, stopped beside Lily's table, crouched down to her eye level the way he did with younger patients, not looming, not performing helpfulness, just making himself small enough to be non-threatening, and said, "Those are good balloon colors. Yellow's underrated." Lily looked at him. She didn't say anything. Thomas had been told, through the general osmosis of small-town school gossip that Kieran occasionally transmitted, that the principal's daughter was shy. He understood immediately that shy was probably not the right word, and he also understood that the worst thing he could do right now was make her feel like she needed to respond in a particular way. So he didn't wait for a response. He just settled into the chair beside her, not the chair directly next to her but one with a small gap giving her space, and looked out at the dance floor alongside her. "Kieran's over by the photo booth," he said, not really to her for just talking. "He's been asking about that photo booth for 2 weeks. I've heard the words photo booth more times in the last 14 days than I have in my entire life combined." A pause. Nothing from Lily, but she had turned her head very slightly toward him, just a few degrees. Thomas noted it the way he noted small movements in patients, not making a production of it, just filing it away. "I'm Thomas, by the way, Kieran's dad. I think you guys are in the same class." Another pause. "You don't have to talk. I'm okay just sitting here for a bit if that's all right with you." What happened next was very small, and would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Lily's shoulders dropped approximately 1 centimeter. The tension that had been holding her spine in that careful, performative straightness softened, fractionally, like something letting go. She nodded. Thomas sat with her. He didn't pepper her with questions. He didn't perform elaborate friendliness. He watched the dance floor and made the occasional quiet observation, about the DJ's questionable song choices, about a parent he could see doing a dance move that should probably be retired, about the way the fairy lights made everything look slightly magical even when the underlying situation was a school gymnasium that smelled faintly of floor wax. After about 4 minutes, Thomas wasn't counting, but he was a physiotherapist and physiotherapists develop an unconscious sense of time. Kieran materialized at the table with 2 photographs from the photo booth, slightly blurry, featuring Kieran and 2 other children making increasingly ambitious faces. He slapped them on the table with the energy of someone delivering important documents. "Dad, look, I'm looking," Thomas said. Kieran looked at Lily. "Hi, I'm Kieran. Do you want to see the photo booth? They have hats. Lily looked at the photographs, then she looked at Kieran. Her lips moved, just barely, and what came out was barely above a whisper, so quiet Thomas almost missed it. What kind of hats? Kieran's face lit up with the particular joy of a child who has just been asked exactly the right question. He launched into a detailed description of the hat selection: cowboy hats, a giant foam top hat, several headbands with various attachments, and Lily listened with an expression that was not quite a smile yet but was trending unmistakably in that direction. Thomas sat back and let them talk. He did not notice, in that moment, that Owen Fontaine had finally extracted himself from the conversation with Gerald and was standing near the far wall, holding a glass of water he didn't remember picking up, watching his daughter. He had been making his way toward her table for the past 3 minutes, moving through conversations the way you move through a crowded subway car, apologizing, excusing himself, trying to close the distance without being rude to the people currently talking at him. He had watched her sitting alone and felt the particular guilt of a parent who knows they have been failing to pay attention and cannot immediately articulate why they allowed it to go on so long. And then he had watched a man he didn't recognize sit down beside her, and a boy pull up beside her, and his daughter who had not spoken voluntarily to an unfamiliar person in the better part of 2 years, whisper something that made the boy's face crack open with delight. Owen stood very still. Around him the gala continued. Gerald said something to someone. A teacher laughed. The DJ switched to a song that was slightly more appropriate. None of it registered. Owen was watching his daughter lean forward, just slightly, to look more closely at the photographs Kieran had placed on the table, and the simple forward lean of it, the curiosity of it, the aliveness of it, hit him somewhere he hadn't been hit in a very long time. He had been so focused on logistics, on medical appointments and school enrollment, and finding a good therapist for Lily in a new city, and making sure the apartment was unpacked before winter, and being a good principal and attending every parent council meeting, because a principal who skips parent council meetings sends a message. He had confused providing with protecting, and protecting with loving, and somewhere in that confusion he had missed the fact that his daughter needed something he couldn't purchase or schedule or optimize. She needed to be in a room where someone noticed her and sat down and was simply unceremoniously there. A stranger had understood that more clearly than he had tonight. The guilt was sharp, but underneath it, quieter and more durable, was something that felt almost like gratitude. He made his way to the table. Not rushing. Something told him that rushing would be the wrong register entirely, that what was happening here required the care you'd give to a fire you were trying not to startle. He walked over and pulled out the chair across from Lily, and when she looked up and saw him, her expression did something complicated. There was a flash of something, not quite hurt, not quite relief, that passed quickly, replaced by a more neutral look that Owen recognized as his daughter's version of playing it cool. "Hey Bug," he said. "Hi Dad." 2 words, so ordinary they should have been weightless. Owen felt them like stones in his chest. He looked at Thomas. "Hi, I'm Owen. I'm sorry I should have been." He stopped, started again. "Thank you for sitting with her." Thomas shook his head, the gesture of a man deflecting credit he doesn't think he deserves. "We were just talking about hats," he said. "Kieran's a hat evangelist. It's a whole thing." Kieran, who had been deep in conversation with Lily about the relative merits of a cowboy hat versus the foam top hat, looked up long enough to say, "The top hat is objectively better, Dad," before returning to the extremely important matter at hand. The corner of Lily's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, it was the very beginning of one. Owen sat down. He did not pick up his phone. He did not look around to see who might need him for a professional reason. He folded his hands on the table, and he looked at his daughter and the boy who was currently explaining hat physics to her, and he stayed. Later, after the photo booth, after Kieran had convinced Lily to try the top hat, she had worn it for approximately 45 seconds, which Thomas privately considered a significant victory. After the DJ played something slow and Thomas and Owen ended up standing next to each other near the punch bowl, having a conversation that started with a joke about the punch and moved gradually into something more honest. Owen asked how Thomas had known to sit down with her. Thomas considered this for a moment. "I didn't know," he said. "I just thought, she looked like she was working very hard at being fine." He paused. "I know what that looks like. I've done a lot of it." Owen looked at him. "So have I." There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable. "She's got a good heart," Thomas said. "You can see it in how she listens. Kieran says things, and she takes them completely seriously. He's not used to that." He smiled. "Neither am I, honestly." Owen was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I've been telling myself that what she needed was stability, routine, a good school, a good therapist, a good home, that if I got all those things right the rest would follow." He looked toward the table where Lily and Kieran were now comparing notes on something with the gravity of small academics. I think I've been getting the list right and missing the point. Thomas didn't tell him he was wrong to feel that way. He didn't offer reassurance. He just said, "It's hard to see clearly when you're scared," and the simplicity of it landed somewhere useful. The gala wound down around 9 o'clock. Balloons were untied and given to children. The DJ played one final song. Parents located their children with the tired efficiency of people who have done this before and know that leaving a school event takes 3 times as long as it should. Lily found Owen near the coat rack, holding her jacket. She took it from him and put it on, and then, in a gesture so small it almost didn't happen, she reached out and took his hand. Owen held on. Outside, the October air was cold and clear the way Canadian autumn is cold and clear. Not harsh yet, but honest. The kind of weather that makes you aware of your own breathing. Kieran and Thomas were a few steps ahead, Kieran describing to his father in extensive detail the photograph he planned to have framed. The one with the top hat, obviously, and Owen walked beside Lily in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. "Were you okay?" he asked eventually. "Before those guys came and sat with you?" Lily thought about this with the seriousness she brought to most things. "I was okay," she said, after a pause. "Not really, I should have stayed closer." She didn't tell him it was fine, she also didn't tell him it wasn't. She just walked beside him and Owen felt the weight of that, not as accusation, but as honesty, which was somehow harder. "Next time," he said, "I stay at the table." Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "With me?" "Yeah," Owen said, "with you." The following weeks moved differently, not in ways anyone would necessarily notice from the outside. Owen still had a school to run, still had enrollment projections to discuss with trustees and field trip waivers to process and parent concerns to navigate. But something had shifted in his priorities in a way that was quiet and durable, the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself but gradually reorganizes everything around it. He started picking Lily up from school instead of having her wait in the office for him. They walked home when the weather allowed it. He asked about her day and then, this was the part he had to practice. He waited, not for a particular kind of answer, not for evidence that things were improving, just for whatever she offered, even if it was very small, even if it was just the name of a song she'd heard at recess or a funny thing that had happened in the lunch line. He reached out to her therapist and had an honest conversation that he'd been putting off, about his own patterns, about the way grief had calcified into a kind of project management, about the difference between solving Lily's problems and being present for them. He also, 3 weeks after the gala, texted Thomas. Not about anything specific, just to say that Lily had mentioned Kieran twice that week, which in his house was a meaningful data point, and to thank him again, more fully this time, for the thing that was hard to name but that Owen thought about more than he expected to. Thomas texted back, "She mentioned Kieran too. He's delighted. Forewarning. He's going to try to convince you to go to the photo booth at every school event for the rest of the year." Owen laughed, actually laughed out loud, standing in his kitchen at 8:15 on a Tuesday evening. He hadn't laughed like that in longer than he could precisely locate. Kieran's prediction was not wrong. The photo booth became a recurring conversation. So did the park on Saturday mornings, where it turned out both families had independently started going, and where it turned out Lily and Kieran had discovered a shared interest in identifying cloud formations, which they pursued with the methodical dedication of tiny meteorologists. Thomas and Owen drank coffee and watched them and talked, haltingly at first and then more easily, about the particular experience of raising a child as one person, the logistics of it, yes, but also the emotional texture of it, the way certain moments hit you differently when there's no one else in the room to absorb some of the weight. No one planned any of it. It accumulated the way real things accumulate, one ordinary Tuesday at a time. In February, Ridgemont Elementary hosted its winter celebration. Smaller than the fall gala, less linen and fewer spotlights, more hot chocolate and paper snowflakes made by the grade 2s. Owen attended not as the principal who circulated and shook hands, but as Lily's father who sat at her table and drank bad hot chocolate and watched her talk to Kieran about a documentary she'd seen about Antarctic weather patterns and felt the specific weight of a daughter who was no longer working very hard at being fine. She was just fine, genuinely, in the complicated, imperfect, still grieving but alive way that fine actually means. There was a moment, near the end of the evening, when Lily leaned over and said something to Kieran that made him snort law into his hot chocolate, and the sound of it, her voice, clear and unguarded, making someone laugh, moved through Owen like something loosening. Ellen would have known, he thought. She would have known what Lily needed before he'd had to figure it out the hard way. She'd always been better at the feeling of things while Owen was better at the doing. He was learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to be both. He didn't say any of that out loud, just sits at a table and stayed. There's a thing that happens sometimes in the middle of ordinary evenings that nobody talks about enough. A moment where the accumulated weight of getting things wrong tips quietly into the possibility of getting things right. It doesn't look dramatic, it doesn't announce itself. Looks like a man sitting down next to a child he doesn't know, because she looks like she's working very hard at being fine. It looks like a little girl turning 45 degrees toward a stranger, because something in his voice didn't require anything from her. It looks like a father finally putting down the to-do list and picking up his daughter's hand. Small things, the smallest things. And yet the kind that stay.